Live. Okay, very, very cool. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Changing the Climate, a show where we talk about the changing world around us and how we can make it better. I am very excited to welcome my guests. This is the moment where I would usually pause for the little bass line, but the intro music is not working this week because I got a little technical difficulties, but I'm very lucky and pleasure to have Micah Parkin on the podcast. Micah, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure. So yeah, I usually like to start these episodes off by kind of just talking about your background, who you are, where you're from, and what got you to where you are today.
I'm Micah Parkin. I'm executive director and a founder of 350 Colorado and a board member of 350 Colorado Action. I moved here from New Orleans actually 12 years ago, 2 years post Hurricane Katrina. And
Wow.
Yeah, have been working on climate and energy issues for, about 25 years now.
Oh, geez. So what first got you interested in the whole climate crisis? 25 years is quite a while.
Yeah. Well, I have always been, interested in environmental issues. Biology and psychology is my background, double major. And it was actually, I think, during my now husband, at that time boyfriend, and I, when we were in our 20s, did a round the world trip, and
really?
for a year and 3 months. And it was when I was in India. The pollution levels were so extreme that in many of the cities had to wear a mask, like a scarf around my face, basically, to breathe because the pollution was so heavy. And it was there that I really realized that I wanted to focus on energy issues, and that the pollution that we were experiencing there, the heavy levels of pollution, were coming from energy production, the way that we burn fossil fuels basically for our cars and factories and electricity and everything else. And, solutions exist, and we just, need to move toward them. And of course, not only is it polluting us and causing a lot of physical damage to our bodies, but also it's causing a whole lot of damage to our biosphere, and to our climate ultimately. And
did you have a deep understanding of like how the Earth systems worked at that point? Did you take classes in high school or university?
Yeah. I was a biology and psychology major, and my biology classes went into ecology pretty deeply. So yeah, I was very aware of how the systems worked, and just was becoming increasingly concerned about the climate crisis.
Yeah, it's pretty startling. So did they kind of had a feeling, or like they knew back then how bad it was going to be, but it seems like the evidence is more and more just astounding every single day. So yeah. You spent a lot of time traveling around the world, and it was in India. That's very interesting. How did you kind of get your foot in the door to the whole climate activism community?
Well, funny enough, in college, I joined an environmental organization, and a youth environmental organization, Students for Environmental Awareness, and got interested and more, just concerned about the various issues that were going on in college. And then once I graduated, I was actually working at a group down in New Orleans, the Audubon, Louisiana Nature Center, which sadly doesn't exist. It was destroyed by Hurricane Katrina, but worked there doing environmental education for a couple of years. And then I started volunteering with a group, Sierra Club, which I'm sure many of your listeners will be aware of. And I became the New Orleans chair of the Sierra Club for several years, and was the energy chair for the state of Louisiana for Sierra Club for many years. And so learned more and more about the issues. And it was through that I met a fellow named Gary Gresh, and there was an organization called Alliance for Affordable Energy. And they were looking at both protecting ratepayers and keeping prices of energy affordable, and also
protecting what?
Ratepayers? Sorry, ratepayers meaning the people, all of us who pay electricity bills. So making sure that energy was both affordable and environmentally responsible. And so anyway, so I started working for that organization, and became the director of that organization.
Okay, could you explain to people what exactly the work that Sierra Club Foundation does? Because I'm not sure how many people are familiar with all these different organizations.
Yeah, Sierra Club is it's a very old organization. I don't work with them, obviously, and I work tangentially just as allies with them.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're just a very they're one of the older environmental organizations started by John Bower, I believe. Gosh, I don't know, 80, 100 years ago. I might be exaggerating there, but a long time ago. So they focus on all kinds of different environmental issues. So I was volunteering with them for a while down in New Orleans. And then, like I say, started working for the Alliance for Affordable Energy, and then worked there until Hurricane Katrina hit. And we were doing a Bring New Orleans Back, and green. I was with the Green Rebuild program down there in the lower Ninth Ward. And that's my first experience with 350, which it wasn't even called 350 at that point, but Bill McKibben and his 7 Middlebury College students who started the organization 350 that I work tangentially with now, and created 350 Colorado. They were just forming at that point. And this was right after Hurricane Katrina had hit. And so they were doing their first national action, and they called it Step It Up, and they were calling on Congress to step up their action on the climate crisis. And because we had just been hit so hard by Hurricane Katrina, it was one of the, first and biggest examples, wake up calls of how we're all being impacted by worse and worse impacts, like major hurricanes and much worse, droughts, and floods and all of the different things that have always happened, but now the dice is loaded and they're happening far, far more frequently. And so we had an event there on the Ninth Ward levee, which was one of the hardest hit areas of New Orleans. A lot of deaths happened there, and a lot of homes just wiped and lives wiped off the map there. So we had a big action there. And so that was my introduction to that group.
Definitely. So that sounds like quite a wake-up call. That definitely sounds like a turning point, not just for your life, but for many people. I know that's one of the modern catastrophes in recent American history. Did you kind of find some sort of, were you like disheartened by like the government's response to that crisis? Did that kind of prompt you to realize we need to do a more ground level approach to these problems? I'm just curious where that comes into play.
Yeah, I think it's during times of catastrophe that usually people are able to pull together. Now, in the case of Hurricane Katrina, we were all evacuated for over 2 months. And so,
From home, it's awful.
Yeah, so we were all, nobody could go back to the city. We were one of the first back, and we didn't have electricity or anything when we first went back. That nothing was open. There were refrigerators.
Sounds so traumatic.
It was like apocalyptic. It really was.
Yeah, no kidding.
For just how these impacts happen. And then I moved here. I loved New Orleans dearly, but knowing how vulnerable that city is, it's below sea level. Hurricanes are getting stronger and more powerful as the climate warms and the oceans warm. It's feeding these stronger, more intense hurricanes. Meanwhile, sea levels are rising as the ice caps around the and ice sheets around the world are melting. So sea levels rise. New Orleans is sinking. Hurricanes are getting more powerful, and the protective wetlands are washing.
And you're trying to start a family somewhere where you guys can live a happy, healthy life. So that's what prompted a move to Boulder, Colorado in particular.
Exactly. Yeah.
What is it about our lovely community that attracted you to here?
Well, we were looking for a good, safe place to raise kids. And frankly, we were looking at the climate impacts and thinking, high ground.
Oh yeah, no, 100%.
We moved here, and I kid you not, within 2 years, we were on evacuation notice again. Right here, I live pretty much in the middle of Boulder, and we were on evacuation notice again because the worst wildfire in Colorado's history was barreling down the mountains. It was the Four Canyon fire. Of course, it's been surpassed by like 4 even worse wildfires since, because all of these things are intensifying. So
picking up on a trend here.
Yeah. And then a couple of years later, we're hit by the 1,000-year, 100-year, whatever they wanted to call it, flood that hit in 2011, I guess it was. And our whole we don't have a basement, but a crawl space all flooded with all of our pictures in it. And so it's like when these things that used to be once in 100 years, once in 1,000 years are happening like very, very, very frequently, more frequently. And it's because of climate change. And so it doesn't matter where you are, is the lesson that I learned. Like everywhere is hit. But it's just how hard and with what types of impacts. And, you're not safe from climate change anywhere on the planet because it is affecting everywhere. It's just different,
beyond a doubt,
flavors of impacts.
Cool. Yeah. So you're very passionate about it. And I love that about you. And I think that's really awesome. Would you want to kind of talk about the process of founding the local 350 Colorado and what you were doing at the time for work, and then how you kind of transitioned to this leadership role for this organization that's helping all across the state inspire people, including myself?
Yeah, well, frankly, after Hurricane Katrina, I felt like, I had been working my tail off as everybody else had been down there to try and fight for a healthy rebuild and bring the city back and all of that. But knowing, like, as I said, what we knew we had to get out of there with two young kids. Probably would have stayed if we didn't have kids, but like looking after their futures too.
You're home.
Moved here but needed a break. So I had two very tiny kids at that time. They were 1 and 3 years old, my two daughters at that point. And so I took a year off but very quickly started getting sucked back in, because I really thought that Boulder was like eco haven. Nothing, it would be perfect. I could put my feet up. Nothing needed to be done.
And you were proved wrong quite quickly.
Well, yeah. I mean, I saw this like coal plant right here in the middle of town, the Valmont coal plant. And I was absolutely shocked and horrified that there was a fully functional coal burning plant right in the middle of, what I thought was, like I said, eco heaven, which, Boulder had the first carbon tax in the nation, was a shining example of where our communities across the nation and world ought to be headed. But I started volunteering with a local organization to try to shift and have that coal plant shut down. It did stop burning coal 3 years ago in 2017. So that was a wonderful win for our community and for all of us, all around the region, because of course, the less pollution we're all having to breathe, the better. And so it was around that time, to get to your question about how 350 Colorado was begun. So I was volunteering with that organization, and then for about a year, and then and that organization was called Clean Energy Action. And I became aware of a job offering with a group called One Sky, which was focused on trying to get the federal government to pass climate legislation. And so worked for that group for a couple of years, didn't happen. And they ended up merging with 350.org. So I started working with 350.org, which was the same organization I mentioned that had organized that first Step It Up action. And so I worked for them for a couple of years as the Colorado and Southwest regional organizer, and was helping to found little local groups, local 350 teams around the state. And then my point person with 350.org, he said, hey, have you ever considered starting 350 Colorado as its own nonprofit organization?
Who was this? Who recommended that to you?
My point person, his name was Phil Iraniano, who's one of the founding students of 350.
Point person meaning a local representative for 350.org.
No, he was a national. He was my national point person. He was like my manager, basically, when I was working for 350. He was one of Bill McKibben's 7 Middlebury College students who helped found 350.org globally. So can you give people a little bit more background on the specific, maybe the mission statement or vision statement of 350.org for someone who's never heard of it? Certainly. Yeah. 350.org is building a movement to solve the climate crisis. They're very much focused on building a movement. And because, kind of our philosophy is when the people lead, the leaders will follow, basically, and that it takes a powerful movement of people to move society in the right direction. And many groups are focused on lobbying. We do some lobbying, but we are way more focused on movement building and empowering people, individuals. So we're mostly a volunteer organization.
Movement building and empowering people. What would that look like on a day-to-day basis or on a pragmatic approach? How does that get accomplished?
Good question. So we do a lot of different things to help build the movement. One is we have different local teams. So when we find different people around the state who would like to join forces with other people in their local communities, we help them form a local 350 team. We have 8 active 350 teams right now across the state of Colorado. We offer climate leadership training, so giving people the skills and tools to learn about how movement works, how movements work, how campaign organizing happens, how to figure out when you have a problem in your community that you want to solve an issue, how to bring allies together, how to figure out who the best leaders are, the decision makers, and then different tactics to try to get to change from, maybe all the way from doing petitions to canvassing your neighborhoods to holding rallies or marches or whatever, and increasing, escalating to demand change.
Do you think we're at the stage where we're still focused more on generating awareness, or is it more important to take action, or can you not really distinguish between the two?
And that's a good question too. I think that it's both. That
Yeah,
unfortunately, I mean, the United States is one of the only nations in the world that where you really still have much of a conversation at all about whether or not the climate crisis exists and whether or
and
not
it's a
Earth
strong
is
one,
warming. Yeah,
unfortunately, because we just love to argue about everything. It's just
yeah.
the way our culture is.
Well, and it's kind of crazy because frankly, I mean, it's just science. Like 97% of the scientists who
That's
study
true.
climate around the world all are in complete agreement. And 97% of scientists don't agree on pretty much anything except maybe that the earth is round, you know? So,
Well,
I mean,
yeah, I mean,
there's strong
right.
consensus. And
Well,
so
some people don't
this
believe
is,
that either.
and I mean, it's
Yeah.
science. And I mean, yes, there are people who just choose to believe whatever they choose to believe and don't want to listen to science. And that's fair enough.
Well,
But
I think it's about believability weighting, and I think many people highly weight people that they respect. Meaning, if someone who you respect says something is some way, they're more likely to listen to that, even
true.
if there's astounding amounts of evidence on the other side. And I think it's very important to get these people involved as well. Not, and I don't want to be shoving things down people's throats. I'd like it to come to their conclusions their own way, but at the same time, I just watched this. It was a news documentary or something this week where they took someone from inside the U.S., the Rust Belt or whatever, and they took him around and showed him all the evidence on the ground. Like they looked at stalactites and stalagmites. They went to Alaska and showed the melting glaciers. And this was someone who originally said, "I don't believe in climate change. I don't think humans can have an effect." But when you stack all the evidence one on top of the other, this guy's like, "Hold on! Like everything I see is pointing to the fact that." It's almost obvious that we are changing the climate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's just a matter of do we want to waste time trying to argue with people who want to stay in their own way, or should we just be focusing on reaching those who will actually make an impact? So I'm curious what your day-to-day kind of workflow looks like at this point.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I think educating people is always going to be important. And,
Hmm.
for the people who will listen to science, sure, sharing the science, which is very, very clear, as you say. I mean, it's irrefutable, really, if you actually look at the science. But then also like having people share their own personal stories, because gosh, I mean, the climate is changing so fast that most of
It's
us,
horrifying.
who have lived very long have actually seen changes with our own eyes. And so speaking from our own experiences, I think is also really important when we're talking about the climate crisis and like what is happening, in addition to the science. Because oftentimes with certain people, like I'm very scientifically minded, and a lot of people are,
Yeah,
but a lot of people aren't, and that almost
that's
like
right.
turns them off if you talk too much about that.
Yeah,
So
connecting on an emotional level can be very powerful.
yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. And so people sharing their own experiences and the things that they care about and that they're concerned about is really important. And then, but as you say, some people are just never going to listen no matter what you say. And so, and that's okay. That's their prerogative. And
I
so
agree. Yeah,
for the people who are going to listen and are really concerned, that's really where we put most of our energy. And like, there have been studies that have shown that there was actually a researcher here in Boulder, and I can't remember her name, but they were looking at in movements throughout the history of humankind, nonviolent movements, and they were comparing violent movements to nonviolent movements and what was more effective. And by far, nonviolent movements were actually more effective. And what they went on to prove is that it only, when they looked at various movements through history, that they found that it only took about 3.5% of active people working on an issue to actually shift society in a new positive direction.
I can believe that for
That's
sure.
really, I found that really interesting and also heartening because, if you feel like you've got
Yeah,
to, change 90% of people's minds, that can be pretty overwhelming. But,
yeah,
if an active group of people can help shift the way that we all think in a positive, better direction, that's a lot more achievable. And so just the
and
day to
yeah,
day, like you were saying, is just helping people to give them the ways to come together, because we can only have so much effect as individuals. But when we come together and we work with other organizations, which our organization works extensively with other organizations on all the campaigns we work on, when we all come together, we have a lot of power.
yeah. And what you don't even realize is 3% actually, it is a pretty sizable amount. But the thing is that if you can sway 3% in this country, we kind of lead social change, as we see what's been going on with the Black Lives Matter movement lately. The United States is at the forefront. Whether that's a good thing or not, we can leave that for another day. But we are kind of leading the world with this media. So it really is amazing how shifting one person's perspective can have such a large impact, because it waves through everything. Yeah. So do you do this before everything that's happened lately? Would you be holding events, or would you be going to communities and talking to people? Like what is it like? Yeah.
It's kind of a mixture. We're very much bottom up, like grassroots up. Many organizations are more top down, and they give the orders from the top and everybody follows. We're kind of the opposite. We, like I say, are mostly volunteer based. All of our teams are local volunteers and of people who are concerned. And so they would organize around whichever issues are the biggest for them, whether it's the coal plant down in Colorado Springs, which actually they've been organizing the team down there for years and working with coalition partners. And they just managed to get it shut down many years in advance of what it was going to be shut down. It's now going to be shut down in 2023, just 3 years from now. And they are shifting to a renewable portfolio. And that's in Colorado Springs, which is not exactly speaking of liberalism or anything.
No.
And so, so
I
there
really don't like that this issue has become politicized, and that's a problem I was going to bring up later. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. It seems like I don't really consider myself conservative or liberal. I try to just kind of talk to everyone. That's what I love to do. But it's so disheartening to see the way everyone seems to think that whatever you're talking about, you have some kind of agenda that you're trying to push votes or the other. And I think that it's becoming more and more obvious that there are, specifically in my age demographic, there are climate voters. There are people who align very strongly with the right, but they know that climate change is real. So they have this inner conflict. So I don't know how they're going to resolve that in the future. But
it shouldn't be politicized. I mean, things like, science is just science. And it's sad that things like that do become and have become politicized, because it affects us all. It's reality.
A complex issue, though.
Yeah, it affects all of our health, all of our safety. And so coming together around something like that is incredibly important. And it's a shame when things like that do become politicized. But.
So I'm curious, you guys are mostly based, you said volunteers are most of the people, and is the organization mostly funded by donations?
Yeah, it's mostly individuals, and we also apply for grants, and so we get some grants as well from different foundations who are concerned about the climate crisis as well. So yeah, that's mostly it. Individuals.
I'm just curious how the funding is allocated in order to be used like most effectively for obviously having an impact.
Well, when I first started 350 Colorado, frankly, we didn't have much money, and I was mostly having to volunteer my time. And then
that's the way all startups go.
Then slowly over time, we were able to raise enough to hire more staff. So we've brought in a volunteer coordinator help, because we are so focused on volunteer. And so helping to train and activate and educate our volunteers and empower them to organize in their own communities was the next big focus. We have a very active, dedicated board of directors who are some of our core activists. And so the funding it mostly has gone toward a handful of staff people who support our volunteers and their work statewide. And then back to your other question about like organizing events, before coronavirus, we would organize a lot of events, different sorts of volunteer trainings, leadership trainings, local meetings, where the local teams will work on the issues that they're concerned about. So, helping to purchase what necessities for events and food or whatever, things like that would also be what some of the money would go to. And then of course online systems, like we have to pay for all of those kinds of online systems. So now everything's moved from in person to Zoom, so we're focused on that and organizing in that way now. And we've held a couple of online rallies and events like that, and trainings and things that have moved all online. Our meetings, our planning campaign meetings and things are all online now.
Gotcha. So what I've noticed so I talk to a lot of people every week, and what I've noticed is that, so I knock on people's doors and see if they have any interest in real estate. And of course, I mentioned my connection to climate change. And what I found is if someone is at student age or like kind of in that area, they always get really, really excited about what I'm doing, and they want to talk to me. Whereas I do get people like that in an older demographic. But I was wondering what your thoughts are on how, kind of dealing with this rift of those who have lived a certain way for a long time and might not be necessarily be prone to change. They kind of are, they like their car, they like their house, they like the way things are. Whereas on the other flip side, most of the people I talk to who are my age are very passionate, very concerned, and very interested in this issue. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on kind of balancing this rift, I guess I'll call it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's, I definitely agree with what you're saying as far as, and we've seen it recently over the last 2 years, especially with the youth movement coming out really powerfully on the climate crisis
Yeah.
issue with Greta Thunberg from Sweden.
Team Greta.
Yeah, and all of the other youth who, climate strikers, and the Sunrise Movement, which really launched the Green New Deal efforts in Congress. And the youth are, because it's, the young people are, of course, going to be the people who are by this, people
Yeah.
who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s aren't going to see as much turmoil because of this as young people will, and they'll watch their children have to experience and their grandchildren. And so, I mean, unfortunately, things are, climate change, it's, people say, oh, can you stop it? Well, no, we can't stop it. It's already underway. It's already happening. But the question is, how bad are we going to let it get? How much suffering is going to have to happen. And I do believe that's up to what we do right now. Like the choices that we make right now are going to make an enormous difference for like
Every
our
day.
kids and their kids and, the young people who are alive right now. So there is a major rift. And with, I think, older people, frankly, just not getting it or not caring as much because they kind of frankly feel like, well, I don't have to see the worst of it. But that's very selfish perspective.
Or it's again, don't worry about it. If they can't measurably see something, if they see on the news all the masks and people getting sick, they're like, oh, we got to get inside for the virus. But they don't see this slow demon slowly creeping up and taking your kids and your grandkids. Yeah. I wonder if there's a way that we need to get the information in front of people, and then the fact that there's this opposition pushing against it for financial benefit or to stay in office is a huge problem. Yeah, so I was checking out your YouTube channel this week, and I know you guys were talking about. Are you still there? Uh-oh. Bound to happen, folks. We're having technical difficulties. Micah, let me know when you're back. I think my connection's good. I'm guessing she's having some connections. Well, I was going to start talking about kind of not pushing, but a bigger emphasis on educating people not only about health, but through diet, but about kind of just consuming just less processed and like meats in general. Let's see if we can get her back somehow. Maybe her computer died. Oh, she's gone. We're still live though, folks. No worries at all. Yeah, so I mean, I'll take this time to talk about how I went vegan. I went vegan a couple years ago. So I went vegan back in 2016 in June. Hopefully she'll get back on here in a second. No worries at all though. Yeah, so I took Alistair Norcross's philosophy class on ethics, and he talked about animal ethics. And that didn't do it for me. I really believe that people are motivated by self-interest, and then I choose to be motivated by enlightened self-interest. And I think that would be a big benefit to a lot of people as well. Oh, you know what? While we're at it, I can move this Facebook Live to point and say, go on YouTube to watch this. Anyways, yeah. So it was when I found out how amazing the health benefits are of eating a plant-based diet. And I think this is more relevant than ever. We don't have a big enough focus on leading a healthy lifestyle. Everyone's worried about social distancing and not spreading the virus. But a great way to not spread. Hi, Micah. I'm talking about
Sorry about
veganism and a
that.
plant. No problem. I was like doing a little side note about how I went vegan 4 years ago and talking about plant-based diet, and how a great way to stop the spread of the virus is by leading a healthy lifestyle, which would include limiting meat consumption. And that's so relevant. So I was wondering, you guys do, I know I was talking about your YouTube channel and how you guys released a video about regenerative agriculture. And I was wondering, in Colorado, we have such amazing farm communities. There is that farm to table movement going on. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I come from a farming family. I've always loved to garden, and I still grow a lot of my own food. I keep chickens. I'm a beekeeper, and
Yeah.
I think I'm personally very, very interested in that. But it ties into the climate crisis a lot and local resilience.
So hugely. It's
Yeah,
probably, in my opinion, probably the most essential factor, specifically
huge. Yeah,
large scale agriculture. Yeah.
yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of people just focus on energy consumption, and that is, of course, the majority of the fossil fuel burning is for energy consumption in our vehicles, in our homes, all of that. And of course, there are lots of amazing and more affordable nowadays. Renewable energy has become more
Oh yeah.
affordable than fossil energy, which is why so many of the electric utilities are starting to shift really quickly. But anyway, back to
Yeah.
your question.
Need quickly. Yeah.
Agriculture is a huge part of the issue too, and like the globalized industrialized food system right now that
It's a
we all
mess.
depend on, it
It's a
is,
mess.
and it's not resilient, which we saw too clearly with coronavirus. And it's also extremely energy intensive, and there are much better ways to do it that aren't destroying our soils and making our bodies less healthy, with all the pesticides and herbicides. And also the cool thing is, in addition to reducing the greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with our high energy intensive food system, we could be sequestering an enormous amount of carbon from the atmosphere into the soils through regenerative agriculture. And
Absolutely.
it's one of the most important solutions that we could be doing, just by using techniques that help to sequester that carbon, pull it out of the atmosphere and into the soils. And it helps build the soils and make better plants at the same time, and feeds our bodies better.
Yeah, I think something a lot of people don't realize is that delayed gratification is one of the most beautiful parts of life. Where if you, I'm talking about in an investing sense, if you invest in your future by eating whole grain foods, eating a healthier diet, and now you said you have chickens and you beekeep, like, just because I've chosen to go vegan, or some vegans come up and say, oh, meat is murder, you can't do this, you can't do that. It's all about building a future that's happy and healthy for you in your own way. So if that means cutting back on just processed meats, I mean, that's a great first step. Cutting down to, some people do like meatless Mondays and stuff. Like, people don't understand that, what is it, like a single burger patty they use like 1,200 liters of water to produce. Like, it's like, oh, what difference does it make? It's still going to be in the store. It's like, no, like, the stores, the grocery stores are a business, and they're not going to create product or buy product if people aren't consuming it. So yeah, I'm just a big fan of delayed gratification. Obviously, I started my own business, and I started this vegan thing, and now I'm at the peak of my health. I started 4 years ago. And you can always get better and better and better. And I think that's kind of the idea of life and humanity in the world, is we can create a better world. And I'm very happy with the way things are, but I'm very lucky to be in the position that I'm in. But we have to constantly be thinking about how we can improve and get better and better and better.
Absolutely. I think that's such an important point, Ethan, and just taking steps, because I swear it can just, you see people get so overwhelmed. They look at this like massive global crisis, multiple crises that we're facing. It's so easy to become overwhelmed by it. And that's why what you were just saying is so important. Taking those one step at a time, baby steps, one at a time, to
Right.
just start to shift toward,
Because it compounds.
what we don't want and toward what we do want. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious what your opinion on, like, the role of money in the solution to this. I personally, I think I have a bias. It's my opinion, but because I come from a business background, I seem to. Your organization is all about grassroots, working from the bottom up. I just have this idea that I'm going to make a lot of money, and then I'm going to use it to make change from the top down. I think there's a lot of people that can get on board with that, and it doesn't have to be one or the other. But I was just wondering, there's going to be more and more socially responsible businesses growing every year. Yeah. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I think you're right. I mean, people can do a lot of good, especially like if they do raise a lot of money and can give towards causes they care about. It can make an
That's
enormous
one way.
change. And or if they, or if they're just individuals and can give some of their own time or chip in what they do have, that all helps too. But the role of business and money in all of this was interesting point to bring up, and I think it's huge actually, because right now
Yes.
the fossil fuel industry, for example, fossil fuel stocks have been being outperformed uh, big time by stocks that don't include fossil fuels in those portfolios. And for example, we had our state pension fund, PARA, here in Colorado. We had an analysis done that showed that over the last 10 years, they lost out on, it was around $2 billion, I believe, if I'm remembering that right. I should look it up, but a lot of money in the billions that were
Right.
lost out because they were investing in stocks that included fossil fuels that were being outperformed by non-fossil fuel stocks. And, a lot of companies, especially oil and gas, are really tanking in a big way. They've never, for
Oh
example,
no.
the fossil fuel, like the oil and gas fracking companies have
Yeah.
never aggregate, never had even 1 year of positive cash flow. And they're over $250 billion in debt right now in aggregate
Huh.
in the United States. And so, and they're propped up like a Ponzi scheme from never-ending loans that just kind of help to
Right.
pay.
Well, to be fair, they have supported the backbone of this country and many others for a long time. So their role was served. Yeah.
Yeah, the fracking industry, funny enough, though, it only kicked off around 2008. And so,
Well, it made a big difference.
mhm.
U.S. is now a net exporter of fossil fuels. So it
Definitely.
is good as far as a power position
Yeah, it
goes.
definitely generated a lot of oil and gas, but it was never actually profitable. It's never had, like I said, since it's kicked off in 2008, never had 1 year of positive cash flow in aggregate, that industry. And it's because it takes so much energy and so much money to frack, basically, that the business model just doesn't work. And lenders have kept pouring into it, with lots of glossy brochures going to different investors saying, look at this amazing new find we have. And so they kept that can being kicked down the road with never-ending loans for many, many years. But over the last, I'd say year and a half, investors have started to wake up. And that industry, we have many companies going bankrupt. They have been for a couple of years, but it's really being exacerbated now by the serious downturn in oil prices during the coronavirus,
Right.
increased consumption and the glut on the market. So it's
Well,
more
yeah, go
important
ahead.
that just, with looking at the finances, that we make people, first of all, aware of the fact that, fossil fuels are far more expensive now than renewable energy for electricity, and that it makes a lot of economic sense, in addition, of course, to like cleaning up our air and preventing the
Beyond a
climate.
doubt.
It also makes sense now economically, which when I started this work 25 years ago, started working on this
Hmm.
stuff, solar was incredibly expensive and wind was pretty expensive then too. But now we're at a point where solar and wind is cheaper than fossil fuel energy. And so it
Yeah.
makes a lot of economic sense, but there's a lot of entrenched power and money in the industry still that kind of is wanting to keep the status quo regardless. And so, but I just think that it does play an enormous role. And so divestment, it has been a big focus of the movement, trying to put pressure on companies like JP Morgan Chase, which is the bank that puts far more money into fossil fuels than any
I've
other,
heard of them.
for example. And so trying to encourage some of those lenders to stop propping up the companies that are perpetuating the problem.
Yeah, let it die if it can't make it, for sure. So to transition a little bit, I'm curious of your thoughts on carbon sequestration, or however the word's pronounced, technology. So I watched a video about carbon engineering. In fact, I've watched several videos. I'm sure you're aware of this company. I'm wondering what you think the role in actual physical sequestration, not just from I'm saying the word wrong, perhaps, not just from trees, but from actual man-made technology. Of course, it will take energy to power those plants, but in one of the videos, it said that 45,000 plants of this carbon engineering plant, or whatever you want to call it, could make us go completely carbon neutral. And that got me really excited. And I started like pulling out my calculator and I was like, I can sell this many houses, we can build this many plants. And I was just wondering what you think about that role in the future of the climate.
Yeah. Well, I think obviously the first easiest and proven thing we need to do is, of course,
trees.
Plants and our soils are amazing at carbon sequestration. And so
no doubt.
Definitely planting trees, using regenerative agricultural techniques so that we can use biological sequestration, which is very proven and it works. And it also improves our soil all at the same time. And, just makes the air healthier as well. But as far as other types of sequestration, I'm skeptical, but optimistic. Like I would love to see some technologies that actually work. Now, some of the sequestration techniques where they talk about just capturing carbon and just shoving it underground. I mean, carbon dioxide is just voluminous. I mean, there's so much volume.
They also want to resell it as fuel again. That's the carbon engineering model. I'm not sure if you're aware. So they want to pull it out, package it up, and then burn it again. So you weren't aware of that. So that's the carbon engineering business model. That's how they're getting investors. It's a sustainable use of carbon. So I know a lot of environmentalists are not super excited about that.
Well, I think, I don't know how you would, because once fossil fuels are burned, it's burned and it combusts and it turns into CO2 and all of the other things. And so you capture CO2, carbon dioxide, but when you sequester it, the problem is, like underground sequestration, for example, or in the oceans, when the oceans sequester a lot of carbon. But what happens when water that's underground or in the oceans combines with CO2 is you get carbonic acid. So that's why our oceans have become incredibly acidic. And just my lifetime, the acidity of the oceans has increased hugely to the point that a lot of shelled organisms and different types of oysters and anything with a shell, coral reefs they're disintegrating as the oceans are becoming more.
I've seen it with my own eyes. Yeah. We went snorkeling and scuba diving in the Great Barrier Reef 2 years ago now. And you could see it. Everything is just dead. It's awful.
And the same problem happens when you try and sequester carbon underground in different caverns and things. When it mixes with water that is underground, it becomes carbonic acid, and the acid can eat away at the different layers of soil and slowly percolate out as the acidity kind of burns through, and then it escapes eventually is what's likely to happen. And so I definitely am concerned about trying to capture and sequester under the ground. And as far as reuse, you would have to do something if you're going to capture CO2, CO2 doesn't burn, it's what we exhale, right? And so you'd have to do something to it then, which would probably take a lot of energy to make it into something else that you can burn again. So, where would that energy come from? And I'd love to see it happen and work. I haven't seen anything that yet that at least seems to be.
Have you heard of carbon engineering before today?
Carbon engineering.
It's a company. It's Canadian based.
Oh no, I haven't heard of that company.
So you should definitely look into it. It's very interesting. They've been getting some decent investors, but again, their business model is based on actually creating reusable fuel again. So so it's interesting, something to look into. At this point, probably many others, I'll do anything. I see it as a game of survive or not. So I'd love to have a nice balanced approach where we can make the world a better place. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm lightning focused on survival, and I want to do it through helping people, of course. But whatever sort of calculation we need to make or formula or projections, I'm game. So that's what I'm kind of trying to figure out.
Exactly. Well, and the cool thing is the solutions already exist. Renewable energy is the solution, and things like regenerative agriculture and solar energy, we've been doing it for a very long time. It works. It's become really, really cheap now compared to what it was just even.
The whole world is powered by the sun. That's why we exist, It's that's what people don't even realize.
And and now the fact that solar and wind is cheaper than fossil fuel energy, like Xcel Energy, which is the main energy company, electric company in Colorado. for most of us use it. And they put out a whole bunch of a request for proposals, and they got loads of bids in from different companies who were offering wind power, solar power, wind plus battery, solar plus battery for storage backup. And in all of those cases, even the solar plus battery, which is one of the most expensive things historically to do, it was cheaper than the fossil fuel energy, than new gas plants. And certainly nobody's looking at new coal at this point. Coal's definitely on the way out. But
Without a doubt.
so that's a really exciting
Most people.
place to be at, in history. And it wasn't like that. Like I said, when I started this work, renewables were a lot more expensive, and now they're cheaper. And so that was a real turning point, reaching cost parity. And
Here we are. It seems a lot about what I'm getting from you is it is most important to just inform people and get them involved, because some of the stuff you said today I was not aware of. So it's just it seems like very essential. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on people who I talk to actual career environmentalists, and they say it's too late. So I'm wondering, how do you respond to that, or what are your thoughts on someone who says the damage is done, it's too late? I can't know for sure. The models change, but it's just that's a disheartening thing that I hear, and I pound back, and I'm like, even if it is too late, I'm gonna assume it's not, and just know that I could fight till the end, and just know that at least I tried.
Yeah, it goes back to what I was saying earlier of like people saying, well, is it too late to stop climate change? Is it too late to stop global warming? Well, yeah, it is too late to stop it because it's already happening. It's been underway for a while now. And
Decades.
we're going to continue to see impacts because all of the CO2 and all the methane and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are going to be in the atmosphere for a very long time. Methane's shorter lived, so like trying to stop all the methane leakage, especially from oil and gas fracking, is hugely important right now because it's such a powerful greenhouse gas, but it is short lived in the atmosphere. So, that's important. But CO2 can hang around, carbon dioxide can hang around the atmosphere for hundreds, even thousands of years. It will still be there. So I mean,
methane's very closely tied to agriculture, animal farming as well. People don't realize. Yeah, the burps.
And so I mean, so what what I try and say to people is that yes, there are going to continue to be impacts as all of the greenhouse gases accumulate and build up in the atmosphere. But as I said earlier, I feel like what we do now matters so much because we still, I believe, have time to reduce the emissions if we act very concertedly and determinedly
this year, today, this weekend.
We can go ahead and start to reduce the greenhouse gas accumulation. And of course, the atmosphere, all of those gases can be up. They can be taken up by plants, by organisms in the soil, by the ocean. And we can decrease the CO2 buildup in the atmosphere rapidly, but only if we act concertedly. And that means shifting off fossil fuels as quickly as we can, adopting regenerative agriculture techniques as quickly as we can. And the key to me is trying to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise, which is what I
would love that.
Have all agreed.
Well, the Paris Accord is targeted at 2, is it not? And it's like we have to do 2, and then we'll do anything we can to get it as close to 1.5. That's what it was, right?
Yes, exactly. So their ideal goal that they were striving for is 1.5 with a bottom line of 2. But sadly, right now we're on a trajectory more towards 3 or 4, or even 5 degrees Celsius temperature rise, which is a world that we cannot even imagine.
It's a desert planet. I watched a video where if we got to 4, the entire world would be a desert except for Canada, parts of Russia, and the Antarctic would be the only actually livable areas, meaning we've got at this point probably 10 billion or 11 billion people all squeezed into the poles with no food or water, and that would be awful. Cool.
Yeah,
so just
mass migration, mass wars over resources, which we've already seen,
or worse,
according to the Pentagon. Yeah.
I mean, we've really only just scratched the surface today, and I know it's really complex, and not everyone will be able to follow all the stuff. But I think inspiring these discussions, I'm sure they're happening every day, and we want more and more of them to happen every day. And on that note, what would you say to an individual who is concerned but not existentially concerned like you or I, who is going to dedicate their career to this, but something they can do beyond just like changing their diet? How would an individual kind of foster an environment that is has people knowing what's going on and how they can make an impact. Sorry, that wasn't worded very well, but yeah, you get it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, I think, three things really. One is educating ourselves, which you brought up several times, like learning about the issues and educating ourselves of what the steps are that we can do. Taking just some steps in our own personal lives, I truly do believe is important, and it all adds up. One person alone doesn't add up, but when we all start taking actions in the right direction, it does add up. And then thirdly, getting involved. If people feel inspired and they have the energy and time, like, do what you can. Some people, they're taking care of an elderly person in their life, or small children or whatever, and they don't have much time. Just do what you can to shift things in your own life. And maybe getting involved with an organization. I strongly encourage people to get involved with an organization working on these issues. And if you only have time to click a button to send an email to your representative, fine.
Like the video, share it on Facebook. We see how much of a difference this makes as far as social change. We saw a wave of explosions of social change going on in the last 3 weeks. That same stuff can happen. Like my social media presence is very, I don't know, new. I don't have too many followers. So when one person likes my video, the boost that it does to the algorithm can be amazing. So if you don't have time, if you're working every day, you get home at 9 o'clock, you click like on Micah's video that she shared, that could make all the difference in the world. You never know what one little step can do.
That's right. All the small steps we take set off ripples. And so it can have bigger
100%.
effects than we can even understand. And so I think, take whatever action you have time for. For people who have more time and are more passionate, they can get as involved as they want to be, especially in 350 Colorado. We're, as I say, very grassroots, very volunteer driven. Our volunteers do most of the work of the organization, and we just support them. So there's a lot that people can do depending on their passion and their time and energy.
Yeah, so if someone wanted to get in contact with the organization, would you recommend just going to 350.org? Literally, that's what it is, 350.org, or 350 Colorado? How would you recommend they get involved with your specific organization?
If they want to get involved here in Colorado, I would say go to 350colorado.org. So 350colorado.org. And
that's where I found her, guys.
Yeah, and just sign up on the email list, and you'll start getting emails about how to get more involved. And you can sign up. There's a volunteer form if there's an issue or an area of our work that you're most interested in. We have lots of different campaign committees that meet monthly and discuss like next steps of what we want to do and accomplish together. And so you can get involved with a campaign committee if you want to, or a local team in your area.
So many options, guys. It's all up to us to decide. Well, Micah, thank you so much for joining us. I was very, very excited to have you this week. I really appreciate you taking time on this lovely Independence Day to join me on the podcast. Yeah, happy 4th. Happy 4th to all. We got a bright future ahead of us. We're the ones that are building it. So yeah, as always, if anyone is looking to buy or sell real estate in Boulder, Colorado, it would be my absolute pleasure to assist you. Thank you all for joining us on episode 5, and we will be back next week to talk about more exciting and positive stuff. Thanks again. Take care.
Thanks, Ethan.
Cool.